Who was this teen messaging in Russian before and after he allegedly killed his parents? It's one of several new questions we have after a bombshell criminal complaint dropped this week, as this 17-year-old was officially charged for allegedly killing his mom and stepdad in Wisconsin and living with their bodies for almost 2 weeks. The complaint also alleges the teen talked in Russian about assassinating President Trump. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. This story that we're following out of Waukesha, Wisconsin continues to get more disturbing, and this week it took a new turn. This is Nikita Casap. He's 17 years old. He lived in Waukesha, Wisconsin, about a half hour from Milwaukee with his mom and his stepdad. Their names, Don Meyer and Tatiana Casap. The family lived in a nice home. Look at this place. Casap seemed to also do well in school. He was once Student of the Month, and up until February 12th of this year, he had perfect attendance in class. But something allegedly changed or was continuing to happen beneath the surface. Don and Tatiana were found shot dead inside their home on February 28th. Don was allegedly executed with a gunshot wound to the back of his head, and Tatiana was shot multiple times, including in the neck, according to prosecutors. The killer, according to prosecutors, is allegedly Waukesha West Health Department Student of the Month in December 2022, Nikita Casap. At this point, it appears that this case is more than, sadly, what we've seen in the past when teenagers turn to violence. We learned in this criminal complaint that prosecutors believe that Casap possibly had plans to kill his parents for months, and that he was talking with someone in Russian on the controversial messaging app Telegram to do it, even plotting to escape to Ukraine once he allegedly did. Nikita's female classmate, known as Witness A in the complaint, says that Casap told her he was messaging with a man in Russian on Telegram, and he said that he and the man were planning to overthrow the U.S. government and assassinate President Trump. Once Casap was arrested, he drove hundreds of miles away from Wisconsin to Kansas, where he was taken into custody. Police did an analysis of Nikita's phone and found disturbing messages in Russian with that person whose identity is still a mystery. In one Telegram thread, Casap allegedly asks, quote, "How long will I need to hide before I will be moved to Ukraine? 1 to 2 months?" And the individual replies in Russian. It's unclear what that reply said. Casap allegedly goes on to say, quote, "Also, I probably should brush up on my Russian because I can understand just fine, but speaking is harder, LOL." And, quote, "So while in Ukraine, I'll be able to live a normal life, even if when it's found out I did it?" Then a key line that could play out in a trial. In Russian, he allegedly asks, that includes headphones as well, quality ones to protect hearing from gunshots of a .357 Magnum, just making sure, end quote. This is a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum. Nikita's stepdad, Don Meyer, had this gun. Prosecutors say when Nikita was arrested in Kansas, allegedly driving his stepdad's stolen car, that same gun was found in the passenger seat in plain view. And that's not all prosecutors say that Casap allegedly had in the car. He had $14,000 in cash. He had dozens of pieces of his mom's jewelry valued in the thousands of dollars, and in the trunk, a camera with a memory card and images that we could not believe prosecutors say it contained. Before I tell you about what was on that memory card, I want to lay out the timeline that prosecutors have put forward of when Don and Tatiana were killed. Around February 28th, Don's mom, who lives in Massachusetts, called police in Wisconsin to go check on her son. She'd received odd text messages from him and said that he'd gone radio silent. That timeline lined up with Nikita's high school saying since February 11th, he hadn't been in class. And we'd later find out that his mom, Tatiana, hadn't been seen since she went to the grocery store on February 11th. When officers entered the house, they found Don and Tatiana's bodies. They were decomposed and covered in blankets, pillows, and towels. Nikita was gone, and a neighbor said he had seen him drive off in his dad's Volkswagen. That's odd, because Nikita doesn't have a driver's license. He allegedly drove through multiple states before being arrested in a small town in Kansas. Was he on the run because someone had killed his parents, or was he the person who pulled the trigger? That camera that was found in the car's trunk shed a lot of light on what prosecutors say happened. According to this most recent criminal complaint, Casap is seen adjusting the camera and posting it at Don Meyer's dead body. The images show Nikita allegedly lighting candles around his stepdad's body, seemingly to maybe combat the smell as it decomposed. Then, more communication with someone who we still don't know the identity of. Nikita is seen pointing a phone at his stepdad's body and is heard, according to police, allegedly saying, quote, "So you can see him there. I can literally see the bleeping body there," end quote. It's unclear in this instance who Nikita is allegedly talking to and if it's that man he said he was talking to in Russian. According to prosecutors, Nikita moved to the United States 10 years ago when he would have been 7 years old from the Eastern European country of Moldova. That borders Ukraine and is majorly influenced by Russia. He allegedly doesn't have a lot of family in that country still. Lawyers did say in one of his court appearances that his grandma is still alive and lives in Moldova, but that's it. These court documents also allege that Nikita was obsessed with Russia, fascism, and gore. His female classmate, known as Witness A in the complaint, says that Nikita sent her what he called gore edits, videos set to Russian music, flickering, gory images of war and horror. Witness A also says Nikita added her on Snapchat, and he apparently wanted more than just a friendship, but she wasn't interested in that. But that didn't stop Nikita from allegedly sending her those gore edits and talking about killing his parents, though he would say that he wouldn't want to follow through on it. At least he told her that in December of last year and January of this year. Witness A says that she told Nikita he seemed like a Nazi and a school shooter and that he needed help, but it doesn't appear that she went to the authorities about these threats. Another piece of evidence laying out Nikita's alleged plans to kill, police found a picture of him holding that Smith & Wesson handgun in January, the gun that police say he used to kill his parents a month later. It took prosecutors nearly a month to bring these murder charges against Nikita Casap. He was arrested in a small rural county in Kansas and then appeared virtually in an extradition hearing.
This is in the District Court of Trigo County, Kansas. It's in the matter of Nikita Casap.
Nikita was then brought back to Wisconsin, where he first appeared in court on charges related to allegedly taking his dad's gun and car without consent, with prosecutors saying the murder charges were pending.
The stepfather was shot in the back of the head, and the mother had 3 gunshot wounds, one close up to the neck and then 2 others that were non-fatal.
Nikita had been held on $250,000 bail after that hearing with murder charges pending. Then, this week, nearly 2 weeks later, prosecutors brought the charges including 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide and 2 counts of hiding a corpse. Prosecutors called Casap an extreme flight risk. Not only was he talking to that person allegedly in Russian, he had $14,000 in cash and jewelry on him when he was arrested. He also allegedly went to a Bitcoin machine on his reported road trip trying to flee the scene. The state asked for his bail to be set at $5 million. Now his defense, which previously argued the case be dismissed because he was only held on the lesser charges for allegedly taking a gun in a car without consent from someone who was now dead and couldn't give consent, well, they argued that bail, even with these murder charges, be kept at $250,000 because it's just an amount that the 17-year-old Casap would not be able to put forward. The judge did increase the bond, but not to the level that the state wanted, even with the disturbing nature of this case and the accusations that the 17-year-old lived with his parents' dead bodies for roughly 2 weeks.
I now have charged and alleged 2 first-degree intentional homicide. The highest counts that we have, quite frankly, in our country is what's been alleged here. And not only can the court think about the totality of the circumstances, I routinely, it's not the first intentional homicide bail argument that I've heard, and I just don't understand. And maybe somebody can make me understand, and why aren't they utilizing the section found at 969.035? That's literally what it's made for. We're not even, I don't have to have the whole discussion as to whether or not 5 million is an appropriate amount for a child of 17, 18 years old, or if it's $250 or $10,000 or $100. He's alleged to have been charged. The district attorney's office can bring forward something alleging underneath 969.035 sub 3. You can say he's not eligible for release. provide the information, we can go through it, because when I go through this information, I look at this complaint. The subsequent investigation that whatever occurred after the first initial appearance seems to be extremely thorough. It seems to have additional information provided by a witness. It seems to have evidence that's been provided in this complaint of, they're indicating they've got video evidence, they've got communication, they've got transactions, they've got a litany of things, and I just don't understand, because it's not like if you don't get what you request in terms of the pretrial detention that you still don't get to argue bond, right? So I just don't understand, and maybe I'm taking my little 2 seconds to stand on my soapbox to try to figure out what's the amount. Is it 5 million? Is it 10 million? Is it 250? Is it 50? The reality, though, is this allegation, this young man, what you would think would not necessarily have access to the sheer volume of funds that is being alleged inside of this complaint, besides the property that was there, the virtual currency that is being alleged, as well as what's alleged as he's connection with somebody. So his access to funds, I have no idea what they are. I don't know if he has access to 10,000 or 250,000 or 2 million. So the reality is I'm going to grant what the state's requesting, but in terms of a high cash bail, but it's not going to be 5 million. I don't even know how I'm going to attribute that. But I am going to give him a $1 million bail. I believe that that's appropriate.
Joining us now to talk more about this case is former FBI and CIA agent, also a News Nation contributor, Tracy Walder. Thank you for coming on with us here at Law&Crime. I want to talk about these Telegram messages that this 17-year-old was apparently having with someone in Russian about plans allegedly to kill his parents. Who could he have been talking to?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Chris. I have to be honest, of all of this, like, I would say that is the most fascinating part to me, obviously being in the national security realm. So Telegram obviously is an app that is used a lot for really nefarious activity. Quite frankly, if we look at a lot of the school shootings, a lot of them have been talking on Telegram. But I don't think I've ever seen something like this before, where he was talking about potential assassination attempts on President Trump. He was talking about overthrowing the U.S. government. Obviously, there's more to the story here. I don't know that he was necessarily talking to anyone, I guess, high up, if you would say, in the Russian government. I think that he was just talking to another individual on this platform. And the reason I say that is because obviously, as a former FBI agent, I think the FBI would have been tipped off to that discussion if they were already following someone in Russia as a result.
No, that's a good point. And Telegram also, for those who don't know, I mean, it is something. What about it becomes controversial with this app? Because it is something we've seen in school shooting situations where they seem to have a profile on this app as opposed to one that you might consider more mainstream, like Instagram.
Right. And it's interesting because Telegram in and of itself is not illegal, right? There's many different ways that we talk, right? There's Telegram, there's WhatsApp, there's Signal now that everyone knows about. There's all these different apps, but for some reason, Telegram is used a lot internationally. It's something that is I think preferred, just like WhatsApp, I think would be preferred more outside of the United States. And for some reason, because of the fact that it is difficult to crack sometimes, a lot of that type of activity and discussion has gone on there. But to the FBI's credit, they've done a pretty good job, in my opinion, of monitoring it and stopping threats before they come to fruition.
How difficult would it be? I know he's from Moldova originally in Eastern Europe, borders Ukraine. There's a lot of Russian influence there. How difficult would it be to come in contact with someone who might even encourage him allegedly to do what prosecutors say he did?
If you want me to be completely honest, Chris, I don't think it would be all that difficult, in my
Hmm.
opinion. The reality is there are all kinds of individuals online, right? I've seen it all firsthand. I don't think it would be very difficult for him. My guess, and again, I have not seen obviously all of these conversations, but the fact that he continued to have them with this Russian, my guess tells me that he was possibly saying that he was going to help the Russian government once he got to Ukraine.
Yeah, and that's the part too where I look at this and I wonder, what was the end game for him? Because he was having these conversations and saying that he was going to go to Ukraine and almost asking like, what's life going to be like when I get there? And here he is, though he was caught in Kansas, which is pretty far from an international airport that would even get you there. I mean, if he, he had a lot of money with him, like 14 grand in cash, he had jewelry with him. I know he's 17 and might not think things through, obviously, if you're accused of this, but think through of how it could get to Ukraine. What would the conversation potentially have been like to get him to the point of thinking that this would have been a real possibility when you think of a bad actor on something like Telegram that could manipulate a young person?
That's actually a really great question. I think, in my opinion, it's several things. The first thing would have been a passport, right? He obviously couldn't use his own. He's 17. Obviously, as well, there was a warrant out for his arrest once his mom and stepmother were discovered. So, my guess is a lot of that money would have gone to documents, right? He has to leave the United States, obviously enter. The problem would be is we obviously, from the State Department's perspective, have a travel warning against traveling to Russia. So I think he would have probably tried to travel to Moldova first and then into those other countries. And this individual whom he was talking to, my guess, really would have been helping facilitate that travel.
What would have happened? So he has 14 grand in cash. He has dozens of pieces of his mom's jewelry, allegedly. Let's say he showed up at an airport and he was going to get on a flight to head somewhere to Eastern Europe. Would he have been able to make it through security with carrying that? What happens if TSA opens the bag and sees all those things in it?
Right. I mean, obviously, that's a good point. The cash would have actually been the most problematic, not as much necessarily the jewelry. People have different
Hmm.
reasons for having that. You cannot have or travel to other countries with more than $10,000. That's the law. And so he would have been stopped as a result of that. And I've actually physically seen people be stopped as a result. TSA is pretty good at catching them with all of that cash. So that would have been my guess is he probably wouldn't have made it out, not because of anything else other than the 14,000 in cash.
Yeah, and that's probably another point of this too, where he's 17, accused of some horrific things, but probably not thinking through what happens at this point when you get on, when you would head to an airport. I also there's witness A in this criminal complaint now, who was apparently a female student at his high school, and was being sent some pretty horrific threats apparently by the defendant in this case. What do you make of the conversations that they were having on Snapchat related to not just Russia, but it sounds like he was laying out a plan to kill his parents?
Yeah, actually, my biggest concern is that she's going to shoulder some of the responsibility
Yeah.
for this. If you want me to be honest, I don't think that she should. These are high school students, and the threats that he was sending her, she had to have been incredibly scared, to be completely honest, and probably was scared about who to go to and who to tell. And my concern is that her name will get out, and she will take a lot of the brunt of that. She should have said something, and his parents might still be alive, but I fully understand why she didn't.
And that's a good point too, because when you're reading the criminal complaint, and I mean, even as a parent, you're like, if your kid was getting sent these messages by someone, um, you got to go forward to the authorities. But I mean, how common is it that you see, especially when it comes to Snapchat, these situations where someone just doesn't know what to do, and then obviously she's young in this case, and those receiving some disturbing stuff didn't go forward.
I think it's actually very common. We saw that actually in Parkland, if we think about it with Nicholas Cruz, right? A lot of his Instagram posts have obviously been made public since then. Students saw and didn't say anything about. Some of it could have been that they were scared. Some of it could have been that they didn't think it was real. And I'm not here to obviously judge parents. I'm a parent myself. It's very hard to be a parent, but I do think it, in my opinion, underscores the importance of that. If our children do have social media, text messaging, all of those things on our phone, we probably need to be going through that as parents so that we can help support them if they do receive messages like this. I know Snapchat messages obviously disappear, so that's a little more problematic, but on other platforms, I think it's really important.
When it comes to Snapchat, because we've seen cases where someone thinks they delete their internet history and it'll get rid of any Google search that they did, and clearly that's not the case. For law enforcement, is there a way to get Snapchat history back, or does that truly disappear?
Nothing truly disappears.
Sure.
Let's be honest about that. Obviously, the biggest instance I think that we saw of that was in the Murdaugh case. I believe it was the Snapchat that, in my opinion, ultimately convicted him. That disappeared right after a period of time, but they were able to recover that and then present it as evidence. So nothing truly disappears. It's just more work, to be totally honest, to obtain it.
What does that work look like to be able to get information from Snapchat that potentially could be used in this case?
So obviously, as an FBI agent, I wasn't a tech person,
Sure.
so I'm not sure of the technical intricacies. But typically, unless it's an emergency, you do have to obtain a warrant for the phone provider, right? And then also for Snapchat itself to be able to obtain those conversations, because obviously everyone has a right to privacy in this country, and you have to provide probable cause in order to obtain that. So listen, it can sometimes take months to obtain this data, depending on how long it takes you as an agent to gather together that probable cause to ultimately obtain a weapon, a search warrant.
I want to turn to just some of the frankly gruesome details that we learned in this criminal complaint yesterday. Probably the biggest part of it being that he put a camera up allegedly in a room where his stepdad's body was, and had lit candles around the body, and was seen on video looking at that. If you were an investigator in this case, you come across this memory card and you look through it and you see that type of piece of evidence, what would that moment be like for you?
Obviously, it's very shocking. Would be someone to me who I'd want to very much argue should not have bail, or a very high bail set. I do believe that they are a significant danger to society as well as a flight risk. Um, I don't understand, the need for the camera. This is someone who, in my opinion, probably had a clear fascination with death, with murder, with violence. And I do believe that he was probably admiring what he had done.
Yeah, and it was a shocking part, because prior we had learned that he was believed to be in the house for a couple of weeks, but we didn't really know how police were able to put that timeline together, and we learned a lot yesterday there. I think back to one of the messages that he said about assassinating President Trump and overthrowing the US government. He's obviously 17 years old, and it'd be easy to look at that and see it as an empty threat. How should we, in these cases where you see a young person like this who might not have access to, certainly had access to a gun in this case to allegedly kill his parents, but, to I think of something large and grandiose like that. How should we look at it? And does a threat like that come into a criminal trial where he could face even more serious charges?
100% he could face federal charges, right, as a result of that. I think that's the least of his problems right now, if you want me to be
Yeah.
completely honest, based on all of the counts, right, that are against him in that criminal complaint. I would imagine we have to take something like that very seriously. If you look at the first assassination attempt against President Trump back in July, really, that was done by somebody very young, a young male, to be totally honest with you, who was also discussing threats like this. So I think every single threat like that does need to be taken seriously, and it probably is being taken seriously by the Secret Service.
How do we overall, and this is a loaded question, but I think of this young person, and it appeared, I mean, he was student of the month in 2022. Who knows what that, what that meant, in terms of who he was, but he had perfect attendance to this point, seemed like he was a good student. And then he's in this place where he's accused of killing both his parents and communicating with someone online. And it just kind of goes back to that parental question of how do we combat this, especially when you might have someone from another country who's convincing him to do it, allegedly.
In my opinion, again, I do not know the inner workings of his family whatsoever. His mom and
Right.
stepdad are now deceased, so I wouldn't want to speak ill of them. I don't think that they were necessarily bad parents. And I'm not sure that there was something in his life that sort of pushed him over the edge, if you will. I think, in my opinion, social media and that Telegram platform really played a large role in him sort of deviating into this behavior. That's truly what I think. Because listen, a lot of people's behaviors do change based on catastrophic events and things like that in their lives. But I would be interested to know when his real discussions started happening on social media and people started to reach out to him. I think that might be a critical juncture in which he sort of changed.
And just lastly, going to the bail argument, we saw the debate yesterday in the courtroom where the defense wanted to keep it where it was at $250,000, but then the prosecution says $5 million is what bail should be at. The judge settles at $1 million. It seemed across the board that even the defense, the prosecution, and the judge were like, he's not going to be able to make this amount, so what's the point? Where do you fall on, I know you said, bail should have been denied, but in these cases, because it does seem like he would be a legit flight risk and that there's levels to this story of what he's accused beyond just the act of killing his parents.
My guess, and again, I'm not in the judge's head, my guess is maybe it was set because he is 17, even though obviously he's being charged as an adult and will be prosecuted as an adult. There's no question. My guess is that is maybe why they set the bail. Everyone is entitled to it. But this was a case in which I do not think bail should have been set. One, he is a flight risk. There's no question he was trying to get to Ukraine. We don't know what kind of documents he was able to obtain. And two, the nature of the crime of which he's accused of. Both of those things together, in my opinion, would go towards making a really good case of not providing him with any bail.
It's a fascinating and a disturbing case. It just seems like every single time that this case has a new development, new court appearance, he'll be back in court in April. It seems like there's just always a disturbing turn to it. Tracy Walder, News Nation contributor, former CIA and FBI agent. Thank you for joining us on Law and Crime. It's always great to have you.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Nikita Casap is being held on $1 million bond. If he were to be released and post that bond, the judge said he would have to be monitored by GPS. The judge also put in an order saying that Casap would not be able to come within 2 miles of that female classmate considered witness A in the criminal complaint. The next court appearance in this case is scheduled for April 9th. For On the Case presented by Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.